I'm delighted to be here today with Janice Shade, an SOM alumna who drove down from Vermont to talk to my students yesterday and today, and we were so psyched to have you. Thank you, Janice, for coming.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. So much fun to be back at SOM.
It gives you energy, right?
Oh, it totally does.
Instead of draining you. You would think you would get tired after 3 hours of class, but you actually walk out more invigorated.
It took me a long time to go to sleep last night because my head was bubbling with
Yay! Oh, I'm
ideas.
so happy to hear that. So Janice is the founder of the for Local Capital, and had a long and windy journey to get there. So first, can you tell me what the initiative does? And then I'll ask you about how you got there.
Okay, so the Initiative for Local Capital, or I call it LocalCap for short, because that's a long name. LocalCap is a nonprofit organization that I founded as an innovation lab where I can explore and test and share new methods for creating democratic access to capital. And really what we're all about is promoting economic justice for all.
So the problem that you're trying to solve is access to capital by entrepreneurs.
Yes, and specifically those who are marginalized by traditional capital markets, whether by virtue of their gender, their race, their regional location, social entrepreneurs, a lot of those that just don't fit the traditional angel or venture capital model.
And so you mentioned in class that this idea came out of something that has been burning in the back of your mind for a really long time, ever since you were an entrepreneur, and even before that, an intrapreneur at Seventh Generation, right?
Right.
So you left Seventh Generation to start a company called True Body.
Mm-hmm.
So tell us a little bit about your experience in raising capital for that.
Yeah, so I had a social mission with True Body to make natural products accessible and affordable to all, and I really tried
Like
to
soap that doesn't have chemicals but costs the same as Dial.
exactly, which was something that was revolutionary then, which is 2008, and still is a bit to this day. There's this belief that people are willing to pay more for natural products, and I was trying to say, why should they have to? Why should people have to pay more to lead a healthy lifestyle? And in keeping with the social mission and trying to incorporate my social and environmental values in everything I did with the company, including where I sourced my ingredients, how I sourced my product and packaging, I wanted to carry that theme through also to how I sourced capital. So that led to some thinking of something that I called my Million Moms idea. At this point, I had two young children. My daughters were 5 and 2 when I first started True Body, and I had this idea: what if I could get 1 million moms to each invest $1 in my business? I would get the $1 million I needed to launch and grow my business. And I would have 1 million of my customers also as my business partners. And I love this idea of moms supporting a mom entrepreneur. And when I shared that idea with my financial advisor, who's also an SOM alum, he just kind of smiled and shook his head. And he's like, you can't really do that. He said, if you tried to do that, it would take tens of millions of dollars actually in registering this type of an offering with the SEC. So it just really is it's financially infeasible. So just go the traditional route, go find angel and venture capital, which I did.
And then that was related to why True Body didn't work out in the end, right? Because you were in stores and you had decisions to make, and having venture capitalists on your board kind of interfered with that.
Yeah, I did end up bringing venture capital on board, and
So you raised the $1 million.
I did. It took me almost 4 whole years of constant capital raising, but I did bring the money on. And once you bring venture capital into your business, you're also bringing partners into your business. So that required giving up a couple board seats to the venture capital representatives, neither of whom had any consumer packaged goods business. Both of them were actually from the technology and the finance sectors. And so as I was presenting plans for the growth of the company based on my 15 years experience with companies like Procter & Gamble and Welch's and Seventh Generation, they were basically telling me what they thought I ought to do, which I knew from years of experience was not going to work. But this is part of what happens when you bring venture capital into your business. You give up some degree of control over your business, and learning how to manage that is something I learned the hard way. And maybe I could have done a little bit better in managing that relationship, but it was something that I'd never been faced with before, and so it was a struggle. And in the end, the venture capital investor basically lost patience. As the company was on the verge of breaking into the largest grocery chain in the country that would have brought it to profitability and really set it soaring. Because that rollout was delayed by a year, the venture capital partner just pulled out, and I was left basically high and dry, and ended up within about 8 months shutting the company down.
Venture capital is not exactly patient capital.
It is exactly not patient capital.
So the idea behind LocalCap is both helping people who don't have access to that capital. You leveraged your networks from the Yale School of Management, I'm assuming largely to get access to that $1 million. And it's also about once you get the capital, having freedom for the entrepreneurs to make decisions in different ways that traditional financing routes don't give.
Yes, and not to say that venture capital is not evil. It just has different expectations and goals that are not always aligned with various kinds of business. So a lot of what I'm trying to do with LocalCap is to explore and put forward ways to match the right kind of capital with a certain type of business. So managing the expectations of both the investor and the entrepreneur so that they're working together in partnership versus a more adversarial relationship with venture capital can often be.
It's really interesting because in last week's episode, we were talking about 3 levels of impact with Eric Clemens of Concat, who works here in Connecticut. And he does both direct service with individuals, helping them get a job, and community level change, helping to revitalize communities, and state level change through policy, advocacy, and legislation. And usually, when people think about entrepreneurship, even a lot of the time in social entrepreneurship, they're thinking of a product or service, which is more the direct service level, like what you were doing with True Body, right? Like this is a bar of soap that you can buy at Kroger and it costs the same as Dial. So that's direct service. But now what you're doing is more the higher level systems change. Like you're actually trying to change the way capital markets work.
Yes, it was through that experience of being in the system. And especially, I will say as a woman in the system trying to raise money and kind of bumping up against things that didn't work and realizing this is where I can really make a difference. From living through that experience, coupled with my previous experience as a financial professional, and it's just kind of the way my brain works. Like, this is where I can really make change, and it kind of builds on my mantra. This quote that I found in right before I left Seventh Generation. It's a quote by Buckminster Fuller, who some have called one of the most creative minds of the 20th century, and his quote says, "You don't change things by fighting the existing reality. To make change, you create a new model to make the old model obsolete." And so I've really taken that to heart as this is the way that I can make change. And kind of a fun story behind all this. One of the ways that I discovered that this was a good way for me to operate, or an effective way for me to operate, goes back to one of my very first days at SOM.
No way.
Yeah. I don't know if they still do this, but during orientation, they took all of us in buses out to this beautiful state park in Connecticut, and they had Outward Bound trainers there. And so we did this whole day of problem solving and team building. And one of the last exercises of the day was each team was given an egg and access to like some scissors and tape and that kind of thing. But we had to basically find all these other materials, whatever we could find out in the wild. And we had to create a container for our egg that was going to be dropped from a ladder. And, so to see who could, whose egg would survive. And so I found the whole dynamic around this team. So, here we are, we're students at SOM. We're all a bunch of alpha males and females, right? And everyone in me like, I think we should do this. I think we should do that. And all the arguing started.
Yeah.
I let my team do that. I went off into a little corner and I just started messing around with some leaves and some sticks and the this and the that. And I just kind of started putting stuff together. And I went back to the team and said, hey guys, look what I made. The arguing stopped. Everyone looked at everything. And then they immediately started fixating on, oh, okay, I see. Now we could do this. And so added things to it to make it even better. But and in the end, we did win,
No
actually.
way.
It worked. And I like to think it's because this is just the way I operate, is I'll go off,
Just build it.
just build it,
Yeah.
just tinker, just try, put it out there, and then let's test it and see what works.
So, what is the alternative model that you're trying to build, and how are you doing it? What will success look like in 5 or 20 years?
Yeah, so I started, with this Million Moms idea, which was kind of a precursor to crowdfunding. The term crowdfunding didn't even exist back in 2008 when I was thinking about this, but now other people have come up with this. Kickstarter, Indiegogo all of a sudden started coming on the scene. Now we have things like regulation crowdfunding, and I was even a pioneer in some early crowdfunding efforts through an intrastate crowdfunding platform called Milk Money that I co-founded in 2016 before regulation crowdfunding came into play. And through that experience of the goal behind for Milk Money in particular with crowdfunding was finding a way to harness the desire among the general public, people who want to put their money where their heart and their homes are, to align their money with their values and invest not just in Wall Street mutual funds and who knows what they're investing in, but I want to know where my money's going. I want to be able to have kind of this line of sight investment and know the entrepreneur who I'm investing in. So harnessing that desire from the general public that is now available through some changes in regulations allowing anyone regardless of wealth status to invest with entrepreneurs who are looking for that patient, what I often call neighborly capital. And so this is the innovation. And this is where I can't wait to see where this can take us. And, crowdfunding is the first step towards it. I don't think it's the final step. We need additional innovation. And some of the things I'm working on now are kind of a variation on the theme of crowdfunding, of creating community investment funds. So to aggregate, take that desire, aggregate it into a fund that can then make patient capital investments. So I'm curious to see where that is. Will we have 5 years from now? I would love to see, will there be a Vermont mutual fund?
Love it. Yeah. You
Yeah.
mentioned something earlier about it was the equivalent of CSA, which is community shared agriculture.
Community supported
Supported
agriculture.
agriculture, but you had an idea about community supported enterprise.
Enterprise,
So
yeah.
this is this along the similar vein.
It's similar, yeah. So community supported, like a CSA, it's pre-selling
Yeah.
a goods or service, which is
And
which
it's
is one
equity
way.
crowdfunding, which is different from Kickstarter and others that are donation based.
Exactly, and I think that's important. There's a time and a place for donation-based crowdfunding, but the relationship that's created when there is an investment made, when there's an expectation from an investor that they're going to get something back, and from that entrepreneur that they need to pay something back, you're locked into a longer term and deeper relationship than just thanks for the $5, here's your coffee mug, kind of a donation crowdfunding. I think there's something really magical about that relationship. It creates more accountability on behalf of the entrepreneur, knowing that they're responsible for the wise management of the funds of someone who they might run into in the grocery store and who's going to ask, how's business? And you're going to have to look them in the eye and make sure you're not doing anything that you'd be ashamed of.
Yeah, I've heard of the term patient capital, but I've never heard of the term neighborly capital. So I love it. And it also, I think, builds wealth for both. It's not just about supporting the entrepreneur and kickstarting their product where you get a gift, but you're not actually getting wealth. But it builds wealth for the community or for the neighbors or whoever you're going to call them.
Yes, and I think that's kind of the pinnacle, and that's when I talk about LocalCap, that it's that economic justice of allowing people within a community to participate in the success of an entrepreneur who's doing something really cool and growing a business and is hopefully being rewarded themselves for growing this business, and having the neighbors and the friends and the neighbors in the community to be able to participate in it too, and get us away from the extractive capital markets that are just perpetuating the concentration of wealth, where the wealthy can come in and kind of cherry pick what investments they want to make, and they make a whole lot of money, and then they extract their capital out into wherever they are. This is generating money from within a community to support economic growth within the community that then circulates back out to that community in the form of return on investment.
So I have a question for you. Do you think that all systems change initiatives like this one need to be nonprofit? I mean, if this is going to work, why can't it be for profit?
That's a great question. And that's part of why we founded Milk Money as a for-profit operation, because I believe that there is, again, when there is that expectation of needing to generate a profit and a return on the investment, it causes a business owner to approach their business in a different way. So I would actually love to see the potential for some of these community investment funds to be run as a for-profit entity that is self-supporting, able to pay the folks who run it, as well as generate some profit back out. Right now, because we while we've had some nice changes to the Securities and Exchange Act of 1933 and 1934 with regulation crowdfunding, nothing's really been done to the Investment Company Act of 1940. So it's almost as old, and it's really in need of some revision to allow for the creation of for-profit community investment funds. Because right now, only the path of least resistance to creating these kinds of funds is through a nonprofit.
Well, we've seen a lot of innovation come out of Vermont in healthcare. It was just an experimental lab to demonstrate proof of concepts and build new models, like you said, that proved that the old ones were outdated. And so I can totally see Vermont doing something on community financing as well. So time will tell.
Yeah,
And you ended your talk with a quote that's very much related to that. After sharing many talks by others, you shared quotes by others. You shared one Janice Shade quote. Do you remember what it was? I'm like putting you on the spot.
yeah. It's my definition of a visionary. And so I say someone who is a visionary is anyone who has an idea that's ahead of its time and has the tenacity to keep moving it forward until the world finally catches up with you.
Right. It's not just having the vision, but it's also pushing it forward and making it happen.
And pivoting when you need to, and always keeping that bigger picture in mind and testing the different ways until it gets to something that people all look at and say, oh, that's such a great idea. It's like, yeah, I thought about it about 10 years ago.
Yeah, which circles back to the first quote you shared and to the Outward Bound experience. It's all saying the same thing to students and other innovators out there, is that when you have the vision, you just build it until other people catch up.
Exactly.
Thank you so much for sharing these thoughts with us today, and we'll keep watching and waiting until this happens.
Oh, thank you. This has been an inspiring day for me, and I love what you're doing with your social entrepreneurship class. So thank you for having me
Thanks
here.
so much, Janice.
Thanks.